My name is Mark Jones. I'm a fellow here in the Baker Institute. It's a great honor for me today to be able to introduce Speaker Joe Straus. Speaker Straus is a native of San Antonio, a fifth-generation Texan, a lifelong Republican, and since 2005 has represented District 121 out of Bexar County. First in 2009 and then again in 2011, he was elected by his fellow representatives to preside over the Texas House, and that's a process that, at least in my from my academic perspective, I expect to be repeated in January, and so he will be the speaker again when the 83rd legislature convenes in January. During his tenure in the Texas House, Speaker Straus has set a tone of responsible and respectful leadership. He's worked with House members to do what is right for their constituents, as well as for what's right for the people of Texas. The Speaker is a fiscal conservative who believes in limited but effective government and is committed to promoting economic development and attracting new business and talent to Texas, while at the same time keeping taxes low. It's, I think, especially fitting that Speaker Straus is providing the keynote address for a conference sponsored by the Baker Institute for Public Policy and by the Hobby Center for the Study of Texas. In my view, both Secretary Baker and Governor Hobby represent really what we consider to be true American statesmen who, while steadfastly being loyal to their respective political parties, at the same time have consistently prioritized the long-term interests of the state and country over what one might call the pursuit of narrow, short-term personal or partisan political advantage. And today, and once again from my perspective only, this isn't the official Baker Institute policy, I don't think there is any political leader in Texas that better fits the Baker-Hobby statesman mold than does Speaker Straus. And so, Mr. Speaker, we're grateful to have you with us here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the very generous introduction. And I just want to say how much I appreciate everyone here being interested enough in the upcoming session of the legislature to be here and to spend your whole day here. And I'm indeed honored to be invited by the Baker Institute and the Hobby Center. And since this is a partnership of the Baker Institute and the Hobby Center, institutions that are named, as Mark said, for two enormously consequential Texans, one a Republican and the other a Democrat, I think this gathering begs for a punchline on bipartisanship. So how about someday establishing an Eric Holder, Greg Abbott Center for Constitutional Conflict Resolution? Or maybe the Joe Biden, Sarah Palin Institute for Intellectual Studies. Oh, maybe not. But in the meantime, I am very happy to be joining you today. And I've, in the past, had the privilege of spending some time with Governor Hobby. He had an unparalleled career. We were just talking at the table about his 18-year career as Lieutenant Governor of Texas. And he has been an example to me throughout my public service. I'd also like to recognize his son, Paul Hobby, who is a very good friend of mine and an outstanding public servant in his own right. And I was very pleased to appoint Paul to the Texas Ethics Commission, and you all should be pleased that he accepted. And he's serving our state very, very well there. I'm working very closely with Paul and his colleagues on the Ethics Commission on needed ethics reforms for our state. In fact, it may say something for this community in Houston and its character that both of the members that I've appointed to the Ethics Commission are from here. The other is former Texas House member and former a lot of things, including former U.S. Ambassador Chase Untermeyer. Chase is serving alongside Paul in bipartisan roles to demonstrate the importance of ethics to both political parties and to our state. I appreciate and commend your hosting this legislative preview conference today. It is important not only for the 181 members of the legislature, but also for as many Texans as possible to understand the issues and the opportunities that will be the focus at the Capitol next January through May. It was Governor Hobby who famously one time said, "The Texas Legislature's only requirement is to pass a budget. All the rest is just poetry." Well, I've now been part of 4 very challenging legislative sessions, the last 2 as the Speaker, and I have yet to find anything very poetic about any of this. It's more, to me, it's been more like one of those bad Irish drinking songs. But perhaps we should ask the current official poet laureate of the state, Jan Seal, for some help here. In fact, just the hope of a more poetic legislative session caused me to pause this last weekend and look at some of her poems. And you too may find it ironic that her poetry has been described in reviews in the following way. Her characters are a delightful collection of people bewildered by life and haunted by memory, but who also find themselves relying on the confidence of experience and the solidity of conviction to press on no matter what. And the review went on to note that she reminds us how human and how vulnerable we all are, how wrong we can often be, and how in the long run, it's the integrity of our intentions that makes all the difference. That word integrity, I think, is an important and appropriate poetic segue back to this event held under the auspices of the Jim Baker and Bill Hobby and the outstanding think tanks that bear their names. I first met Mr. Baker, as we were discussing earlier, back in 1978 when I was a teenager. I was 18 years old, and he was running for Attorney General of Texas. My uncle was a former Marine and friend of his, and he was the San Antonio campaign chairman. I was asked to drive Mr. Baker to the Kerrville Folklife Festival on one very hot summer day, where we spent the entire day passing out campaign literature. I learned very quickly that there is no such thing as slacking off when you work with Jim Baker. Even an 18-year-old kid out there in the hot sun for about 12 hours. What I remember most, though, is the drive back to San Antonio when I was absolutely exhausted, and I was having trouble staying awake on Interstate 10. And I'm sure that Mr. Baker wasn't really all that interested in the conversation with the kid driving, but he had to keep me awake the entire way. And it was just a few years later, 1986, when he was Treasury Secretary, that I was managing Lamar Smith's first campaign for Congress in the fall of '86, and Lamar needed some money. You may have noticed that's a common affliction with politicians. And so I called Secretary Baker's office and spoke with Margaret Tutwiler, who was his longtime confidant and close aide, whom I had met in the 1980 Bush campaign. And I asked Margaret if Secretary Baker would come down and do a fundraiser for Lamar in San Antonio in September. And she said, absolutely not. He is totally focused on President Reagan's tax reform, 1986. He's not doing any politics in this cycle. I didn't take no for an answer. I said, Margaret, I'm talking about September. He could come down and do a lunch for Lamar, and he could be at his ranch in Pearsall shooting doves by 3 o'clock. She said, well, he might do that one. And then she handed me over to a young lady who was Secretary Baker's scheduler. Her name was Julie Brink. And in May of this next year, she's now Julie Straus, and we've been married for 25 years. So to say that I owe a lot to Jim Baker is an understatement. And Julie and I are just 2 of the many people who have learned a great deal from Secretary Baker. His willingness to tackle complicated problems with diplomacy and respect and professionalism is something that we should all strive for in our public service. I like to imagine some of the meetings that he must have had with Dan Rostenkowski back in 1986 when he was working on that tax reform, or his discussions with Dick Cheney and Colin Powell during the Gulf War. I have no doubt that there were intense policy differences that occurred at times, but with Jim Baker, there was always a purposeful and skillful approach to policymaking and responsible governing. That sense of purpose, the skill, and the diplomacy that defined Jim Baker's career is exactly what we need in Texas, particularly as we look toward the future. As Steve Murdoch will tell you, we are a growing state. Looking back just 12 years ago in 2000, there were 20 million people in Texas. And by 2010, we reached 25 million. I'm told now that we're over 26 million in this state, and his estimates are that Texas growth could put us at over 33 million Texans by the year 2030. And speaking of the future, we have today 5 million children in our public schools. 5 million, I always put this in context when I'm out speaking. 5 million is more than the total population of 29 states in the United States. And with this next session approaching, we need to get serious about the big and the important issues so that we have a strong foundation for that future in 2030. We need to be dedicated to improving our public education, upgrading our transportation system, and ensuring that we have an adequate supply of water and electric power. We can either be overwhelmed by our state's growth, or we can lay the foundation so Texas is the center of innovation and opportunity. As Texans, we are all proud of being number one in job creation and in economic development, and we never want to be anything less. But I do not want the legislature to ever become complacent or overconfident when we look at the business rankings of the states. Our commitment to making Texas friendly for business should never diminish. But as our businesses are encouraged to thrive, our people should thrive too. Texas has been number one for several years, but I think there's a real possibility that without some long-term thinking in education and infrastructure, this may not always be the case. Other states are certainly getting more competitive, and they would like to be number one. With that in mind, I've asked every committee of the Texas House to recommend policies that can lead to creating jobs in manufacturing and to lead more manufacturing companies to move to our state. We're a right-to-work state. We have an abundant workforce. We impose a relatively low tax burden and a light regulatory hand. I hope to see even more headlines about companies moving to Texas and creating even more private sector jobs than the 540,000 that have been created since the recession technically came to an end in 2009. And with more jobs, we need a better trained workforce. And that's why I'm working with members of the House to encourage programs that modernize and strengthen our technical education programs in our high schools and in our community colleges. We know that not all young Texans are going to attend a four-year college. So by the 12th grade, they should be career ready, and we can do a much better job preparing our next generation for the workplace. Our legislature can also foster a more friendly and a more collaborative partnership with our state institutions of higher education. Texas colleges and universities are among the most important institutions that we have when it comes to projecting our image and our reputation, not only just around the country, but literally around the world. Here at Rice, you've produced 101 Fulbright scholars, 20 Marshall scholars, 12 Rhodes scholars, an attorney general, 3 Olympians, an energy secretary, the mayor of Houston, and 14 astronauts. If we want to continue to produce leaders and bring the very smartest people to the state of Texas, we should focus on creating an environment where good jobs exist, where innovation is rewarded, and where funds are available to support critical research. As I've traveled this state, I am certain that Texans are united in their desire to tackle these issues. But if improving our transportation system, financing and reforming education, and securing a reliable water supply were easy or simple, it would have been done a long time ago. when the state water plan rings in at $53 billion and transportation estimates are somewhere around $270 billion, the magnitude of these problems becomes so big that we're tempted just to throw up our hands and do nothing. But our state's leadership cannot be intimidated by the enormity of the challenge. If we focus on the issues that most impact Texans and we work in a collaborative way and have the courage to make difficult choices, I believe we can be more confident about a state that we can be proud of when that year 2030 comes along. We're nearing the end of another long campaign cycle that's full of comparisons and confrontations. That's just what campaigns are. But I hope that beginning on November the 7th, the day after, we all change gears from campaigning to governing, and we keep our eye on our state's future and think about those 33 million Texans who will be here in the year 2030, rather than those elections that will be out there in 2014 or even 2016. And although the Texas Legislature only meets 140 days every other year, we are literally charting a roadmap for a brighter and a more vibrant future. A state that can be that frontier, the new frontier of opportunity and innovation. And a state that will be better for Texans who are not even born yet, or for some of those people from California that haven't decided to move here just yet. I try very hard in this job as Speaker to prevent Austin from becoming like Washington, D.C., where gridlock and obstinance have been the rule. I've been criticized for reaching across the aisle and working with colleagues that I don't usually agree with. But Secretary Baker once said, when handling a contentious diplomatic situation, he said, "My view is that you don't just talk to your friends, you talk to your enemies as well." Or as Mr. Baker's longtime confidant and his partner, George H.W. Bush, once said, "Your political opponents are never your enemies. They may be your adversaries, but never your enemies." We should take this to heart, and we should commit to working together across all lines of division so that our diverse and our ever-changing state is on the right path forward. And whether we're debating the budget or higher education or economic development or our water needs, we cannot ignore each other's point of view, nor can we ignore the facts. And forums like this one can serve a valuable role in helping to develop common ground, understanding the basis of the complicated issues that face us. And if legislators can agree on the facts, we'll be more apt to find areas of agreement on the solutions. So I'll enter the 83rd legislative session welcoming all voices and all opinions aimed at productive conversations about the future of our state. Our best chance of success is working as Secretary Baker and Governor Hobby did during their service to our state and in their service to our country, and as they continue to do through the Baker Institute and this Hobby Center, constructively, thoughtfully, and always respectfully. So I thank you for your involvement here today, involvement that I hope you will continue at the Texas Capitol next January. And I hope that the success of this conference foreshadows the success of the next legislative session. Thank you all very much. You want me to answer questions? Uh-oh. I think I'm trapped.
Yeah. We have some time for a few questions as I open it up to the floor.
Time to wake up from your nap. Yes, sir.
My question has to do with the Medicaid expansion. I heard what Mr. Blyford said this morning, and I've heard what you've said, and the governor. But when you say restructuring of the current Medicaid program, what would you have in mind when we get down to the?
Did I say that to
Andrew?
Well, I know the governor's been very, very strong on the point of not expanding Medicaid now, and I've supported him in that decision. I think we have to wait and see what the elections bring, to see what the environment is in Washington. And then the legislature will be back in January where we can have an intelligent discussion where all the members can represent their own communities and we can get all the facts out on the table. But for today and for right now, I think the governor's position is the reasonable one for the state.
Hello.
Hi.
My question is related to public education, and particularly, what do you see as some of the challenges and some of the things that the legislature will be doing in the future with regard to education?
Well, you'll have to wait till the 2:30 panel, but where you have people that know a lot more about education policy than I do. But the biggest issue we have is the same issue we have in all the other areas that I touched on in my remarks: water, transportation, education, all the things that are very difficult to keep up with in a fast-growing state. We have demographic challenges in education that are extraordinarily challenging. I'm one who doesn't believe there's a magic bullet that will fix education. There are a lot of ideas out there, a lot of people working very, very hard. Every community in the state's different too. Schools are different. Families are different. I always mention a book that I read this summer that I would recommend to everyone that touches on education, but touches on more than just education. It touches on poverty and on the culture in America. It's a book called Coming Apart, and it's really well worth the time to read it. I'm not convinced that government can really fix education, but we should try, and we should try to use every idea that could make sense. There are a lot of ideas out there right now. There are a lot of lawsuits, as you know, right now, that will impact how we address education. It's a little bit too early to say exactly where we're going. The last session was extraordinarily difficult. We had a $27 billion budget shortfall. We had a commitment not to raise taxes. And so we shrunk the budget of the state. Relatively speaking, the education piece didn't shrink as much as others. It just didn't grow along with population growth. So we couldn't keep up. I believe that we will be able to keep up with growth in the next budget if the numbers that we're hearing about right now hold. But there will also be these court cases working their way through. So I think on the financing side, we have a real opportunity to revisit the formulas and to revisit this system that is a real mystery to me and to most people who are honest about it. I think it'll be a fascinating discussion to take a look at the 1,200 school districts in the state and to see how much their point of view may have changed along with their property wealth. There are some areas south of San Antonio in the Eagle Ford who were once property poor may not be anymore. So I think the whole system is in position now to have a thorough review and an adjustment. And I welcome everybody's ideas. Testing, I think, is going to be a big issue too, that a lot of people have been working on, a lot of people have been critical of. The whole area of testing and accountability, I think, will be examined as well. Hello, Senator. I'm great. Me too. And Representative-elect Bonin is here, and my San Antonio friend, Representative Villarreal. Oh, good. Oh, hi. Welcome. You should have answered that question.
Speaker Straus, thank you for coming here today, and I appreciated your thoughts. I was wondering if you could elaborate on your comments about strengthening manufacturing in the state, because one could easily also say that maybe we should be promoting perhaps biotech, information technology, many financial services. I'm just wondering why the emphasis on manufacturing.
Because I feel like it's a great opportunity for our state with the revolution in energy technology, in the advantages that we have with our workforce, with our institutions of education that can lead to training people for good careers and good paying jobs in manufacturing. I just really think that should be a focus. I'm no expert in international economics, but friends of mine have told me that conditions for us to make major strides in Texas have never been better, or not in recent times. And so I think it's an area that undoubtedly could pay great dividends for our state. And so it's a special focus, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be diversifying our economy in many ways. But as long as we have these incredible things going on in the energy sector, and we have such a large available workforce, taking full advantage of manufacturing opportunities makes great sense to me.
All right, so you addressed some of the needs that are becoming more and more urgent, such as transportation, education, funding, all this. Now that we're kind of out of the recession, is there any possibility you think the legislature would seriously consider sources of new revenue or, God-fearing, increased taxes in some areas to help address some of these costs that are coming down the road?
Well, I don't know, but I do know that with the expansion of the economy and people going back to work, that our current revenues are increasing. So I'm not expecting massive new revenues or massive new revenue avenues in the next session. I'm hoping that we continue to encourage private sector growth so that government revenues do increase. There may be some areas in transportation or some specific targeted areas that could be addressed, but we'll wait and see what all the ideas are in January. The good news is the projections from the comptroller in recent weeks lead us to believe that in this current budget we'll come in with a surplus. And as you know, our rainy day fund has been largely untouched, and thanks again to the booming oil and energy sector in Texas, we expect to have $8 to $9 billion in the rainy day fund when we come back in the session. Although I've been speaker now for 2 sessions, and I am now wise enough to know that the only projection that matters is the one that the comptroller gives you on the first day of the session. I've been burned twice by that with some deeply red numbers that I wasn't expecting. So our fingers are crossed that the good news will continue, but you never know until you get there in January.
Mr. Speaker, right over here.
Yes, sir.
What do we do to tackle the massive transportation needs that TxDOT has?
Well, I believe some of the internal issues that were a problem at TxDOT are being addressed and have been over the last year or so, which I think with the turmoil or the turbulence over there made addressing other financial issues there more difficult. I think they're getting their management and their operations under control, and there are some ideas out there. Tommy Williams has had some thoughts in finding money for transportation. There have been some ideas out there that haven't been very well fleshed out yet, using some kind of using a portion of the rainy day fund, some sort of a mechanism to help in transportation projects. There may be some other ideas out there too that we'll see. But one thing I haven't addressed, and something I'm very committed to, and I've heard the governor talk about it a lot as well, is coming to grips with this approach of using so-called dedicated fees for their intended purpose. And I know that it's been a particular problem in transportation with diversion of money that people assumed would be going to transportation, not going to transportation. So hopefully we can we can begin to turn that back. And once we do that, or along with some of these other measures, maybe we can get on firmer footing on transportation. But there's no doubt we have some very difficult decisions to make. This whole issue of dedicated fees piling up in accounts that are unexpended is now, it started 20 years ago. It's now become a $5 billion item. The comptroller needs money to certify a budget as being balanced, so I understand why it's been allowed to occur. And I especially understand it in very difficult budget years when you make some pragmatic decisions. But in the good years, there is no excuse for it. And it's time to be honest with the people of the state. And if we're going to have a fee that is supposedly dedicated, says it should be dedicated, and that's the reason the fee was passed in the first place, we should use those funds for its intended purpose. Transportation's an area that I think is way at the top of the list for that.
I think, Mr. Speaker, I know you have a busy schedule today, but we really appreciate your visiting us today and providing us with an outstanding presentation. So
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.